I'll never forget the moment she said it. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind where the light streams through the curtains and everything should feel safe. Instead, I stood in the living room of the house I'd called home for 30 years, my heart pounding in my chest as she sneered at me across the room. "This house isn't yours," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of smug certainty that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like smoke choking me. I'd lived in this house since I was 25. I'd watched my children take their first steps across this hardwood floor. I'd planted roses in the front garden, painted every room twice, and mended every creak in the staircase. But none of that seemed to matter to her. She looked at me like I was some unwanted guest who'd overstayed my welcome. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. There were people around us, family friends, neighbors even gathered for a barbecue we'd planned weeks ago. She'd waited for this moment, I realized. Waited until she had an audience. She always did, like a stage. Her name was Vanessa, my late husband's niece. She'd moved in a year ago when she needed a place to stay, and I'd welcomed her like a daughter. But over time, she'd started acting like she owned the place. She'd rearranged the furniture, dictated what color I could paint the kitchen, and made snide comments about how old-fashioned my taste was. I'd tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to generational differences. But this was different. I looked into her eyes, green cold and unwavering. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, a smirk on her lips. "You heard me," she said. "This house isn't yours." It never was. A few people gasped. Others looked away, pretending not to have heard. I could feel my hands trembling at my sides. I wanted to scream, to throw my drink in her face, to tell everyone what she'd really done. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and forced my shoulders back, refusing to let her see me falter. "Why would you say something like that?" I asked. My voice was calm, but inside my blood was roaring in my ears. "Because it's the truth," Vanessa said, her tone sweet as poison. "You were just living here because of my uncle. But he's gone now, and so are your rights to this house. My late husband, Martin, had passed away 2 years ago. He'd left the house to me in his will, at least that's what I'd always believed. But in that moment, doubt flickered in my mind. I realized she was playing on that, sowing seeds of uncertainty. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're just a guest, and it's time for you to move on," she said. "You're holding on to something that doesn't belong to you anymore." I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat. The rage, the humiliation, the sheer disbelief, it all threatened to boil over. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Instead, I turned and walked away. I could hear the whispers starting behind me, but I didn't care. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode. I slipped into the kitchen and closed the door behind me, the cool air a relief against my flushed skin. I leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths to steady myself. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set down the glass I was holding. I could hear them out there, Vanessa's voice high and triumphant, and the low murmur of others too polite to intervene. For a moment I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and walking out that door, leaving her to gloat over the ruins of everything I'd built. But then I looked around this kitchen, my kitchen. I thought about every Sunday morning I'd spent making pancakes for my kids, every Thanksgiving dinner I'd cooked at that old stove. This was my house, and I wasn't going to let her take it from me. I walked over to the old sideboard, where I kept a battered shoebox full of important papers. My hands were still trembling as I pulled it out and flipped through the contents. Birth certificates, old tax returns, letters from Martin, and there, tucked away at the bottom, was the original deed to the house, my name and Martin's right there in black and white. I ran my fingers over the paper, the weight of it grounding me. Vanessa could say whatever she wanted, but this house was mine. I closed the box, my resolve hardening. I knew what I had to do. When I stepped back into the living room, Vanessa's laughter cut through the air like a knife. She was talking to a group of our neighbors, her arm draped casually over the back of my old sofa, like it was hers. I felt the anger rise up in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I would not lose my composure. Not now. Vanessa turned when she saw me, her smile dripping with false concern. "Oh, are you all right?" she asked sweetly. I met her gaze, my expression calm and unyielding. "I'm fine," I said. "And this conversation isn't over." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Just a flicker, but it was enough. I turned away from her and began greeting my guests like nothing had happened. I forced myself to smile, to laugh when I needed to keep up the polite chatter. But underneath it all, my mind was already working. Vanessa thought she'd won. She thought she could push me out with a few cruel words and a well-timed insult. She had no idea what she was up against. I'd spent my whole life fighting for what mattered to me, my family, my home, my place in the world. And I wasn't about to stop now. I knew I had a battle ahead of me. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was wrong. This house was mine, and I was going to prove it. The next morning, the house was quiet, too quiet. I woke early, the sun barely over the horizon, but my mind was already racing. Vanessa's words had haunted my dreams, her smirk flashing in the shadows of my sleep. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was angry. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet. That sound used to comfort me, like the house itself was alive, whispering that I belonged here. Now it felt like a challenge, a reminder that I had to fight for every inch of this place. I pulled on a sweater, the one Martin had bought me for our 20th anniversary. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old memories. I paused for a moment, letting the warmth of those memories steady me. Martin's voice echoed in my mind, calm and reassuring. "This house is your home. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Downstairs, I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the steam curling in the cold morning air. I spread out the contents of that battered shoebox: documents, photographs, scraps of our life together. Each piece was a fragment of my story, proof that I had roots here, that I wasn't just some squatter in someone else's house. I picked up an old photo of Martin and me, standing in front of the house the day we bought it. My hair was longer than streaked with gray, but still shining in the sun. Martin's arm was around my shoulders, his smile as wide as the sky behind us. We'd scrimped and saved for that down payment, working double shifts and skipping vacations. We'd fought for this house, every nail and every brick, a testament to our love. And now Vanessa thought she could just erase that. No, I wouldn't let her. I thought back to the first time Vanessa had stepped through that door. She was all sweetness and charm, her eyes wide and grateful. "Thank you for letting me stay," she'd said, her voice soft, her hands wringing nervously. I'd believed her, of course I had. I'd wanted to believe she was family, that she'd respect the history of this place. But it didn't take long for the mask to slip. She started with little things, moving my grandmother's vase to a different shelf, replacing my curtains with ones she liked better. She said she was just making things brighter, but I knew better. She was staking her claim. It hurt more than I'd admit to anyone. This house had always been my sanctuary, the place I could be myself. And every change she made felt like a small betrayal, a reminder that she didn't see me as part of this home's story. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The roses I'd planted were blooming bright splashes of red and white in the early morning light. I thought about the hours I'd spent out there, hands deep in the dirt, coaxing beauty from the ground. Vanessa had laughed at me for it. "Who even cares about roses anymore?" she'd said, rolling her eyes. I cared, because those roses were proof that I could build something beautiful, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. I turned away from the window, my resolve hardening. Vanessa could play her games all she wanted, but I had something she didn't: history. She saw this house as just another asset, a trophy she could show off to her friends. But to me, it was life itself. I walked back to the table and picked up the deed again, the paper worn, but still clear. My name and Martin's side by side. I traced the letters with my fingertip, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. This was more than just paper. It was a promise, a testament to everything we'd built together. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing there with a worried look on her face. She was holding a plate of muffins, the kind gesture tinged with the awkwardness of someone who'd heard more than she should have the night before. "I just wanted to check on you," she said softly. Vanessa was, well, she was out of line. I nodded, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you. I'm fine," I said, though my voice shook a little. She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "You know, everyone around here remembers how hard you and Martin worked for this house," she said. "We've all seen what you put into it." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "I appreciate that," I whispered. She squeezed my arm gently, then handed me the plate of muffins. "If you need anything, you let me know," she said. "Don't let her bully you." I watched her walk away, her words echoing in my mind. "Don't let her bully you." I wouldn't. I closed the door and set the muffins on the counter. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, a man named Tom, who'd helped Martin and me with our estate planning years ago. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was steady as I explained the situation. "I need to make sure my name is still on that deed," I said. "And if it isn't, I need to know what my options are." Tom was calm and reassuring, just like he always was. "I'll look into it," he said. "But if the deed says your name, she doesn't have a leg to stand on." I thanked him and hung up, my mind buzzing. I knew this was just the beginning. Vanessa wouldn't back down without a fight. She was too used to getting her way. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been when she first moved in. I'd spent too many years letting people walk over me, swallowing my pride for the sake of keeping the peace. Not anymore. I looked around the kitchen, every dent and scratch a reminder of the life I'd built here. This was my home, and I was ready to fight for it. I took a deep breath, feeling the first spark of hope in days. Vanessa thought she could push me out with her lies and her cruelty, but she didn't know me. She didn't know what I was capable of when I had something worth protecting. I wouldn't let her win. Not now, not ever. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't waste another second. Vanessa's words had rattled me, but they'd also lit a fire in my gut. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about my dignity, my place in this world. And I was done letting her trample on it. I spent the early hours of the day combing through every file I could find in my old wooden filing cabinet. The cabinet itself was a relic, chipped paint, squeaky drawers, but inside it held the story of my life. I pulled out folders thick with bills, paid renovations, done every scrap of proof that I hadn't just lived in this house, I'd kept it alive. My fingers paused on one folder marked Improvements, thick with receipts for everything from new gutters to fresh paint on the porch. I smiled a little, remembering how Martin and I used to argue over every color swatch and every hardware store run. He'd always said, "A house is like a marriage, darling. It takes work, but it's worth it." I wiped a tear from my cheek and kept going. The more I looked, the more I realized I had an arsenal of evidence. Every nail, every coat of paint, every mortgage payment with my name on it. It wasn't just paper. It was a history, and it was mine. I picked up the phone and called Tom again. His calm voice was like a steady anchor. "I've got a meeting at the courthouse this afternoon," he said. "I'll see if there's been any funny business with the deed." "Thank you," I said, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles were white. "I'm not letting her take this from me, Tom." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I know you're not. And you're stronger than you think you know." After I hung up, I sat for a long moment, staring at the kitchen table. Vanessa's words still echoed in my head, but they didn't feel as heavy now. I was done being quiet. If Vanessa wanted a fight, she was going to get one. By noon, I decided I needed to confront her head on. I couldn't let her think she'd scared me into a corner. So I found her in the living room, lounging on the couch, with a smug look that made my blood boil. "Vanessa," I said calmly but firmly, "we need to talk." She glanced up, one eyebrow raised in that way she always did when she thought she was above it all. "Oh, about what, dear?" I took a deep breath. "About this house. And about what you said." She smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, are you still stuck on that 'I told you this place isn't yours'?" I held her gaze, my voice steady. "Actually, it is. And I have the paperwork to prove it." For the first time, I saw her smirk falter, just a crack in that perfect facade. What paperwork? She asked, her tone suddenly sharper. I didn't flinch. The original deed. My name's on it. And Martin's will backs it up. I've spoken to Tom, and we're getting everything in order. Her face paled a little, but she recovered quickly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Oh, I'm sure there's been some mistake. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself over a misunderstanding. I leaned in closer, my eyes locked on hers. The only mistake would be letting you bully me into giving up what's mine. Vanessa's jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She wasn't used to me standing up to her. She was used to me shrinking back, apologizing for everything. But I was done apologizing. She stood up, smoothing the front of her dress like she was brushing off my words. Fine, she said coolly. If you want to play lawyer, be my guest. Just don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, but my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. I spent the rest of the day pulling together everything I'd need. I called the utility companies to put all the bills back in my name. Vanessa had been changing things behind my back, I realized. I called the bank to make sure the mortgage statements were up to date. Each phone call felt like a small victory, a step closer to taking back what was mine. But even as I worked, doubt still crept in. What if Vanessa was right? What if there was some loophole I didn't know about, some technicality she could exploit? Every time that doubt bubbled up, I'd force myself to remember the way Martin had laughed as we signed those papers. How he'd said, "You'll always have a home here no matter what." I clung to that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the hallway, the old floorboards creaking under my bare feet. In the dim light, the house felt like it was holding its breath along with me. Every shadow seemed to whisper the same question. Was I really ready to do this? I stopped at the top of the stairs, my hand resting on the banister. From there, I could see the faint glow of the living room lamp, still on where Vanessa had left it. That was my light. My house. My history. I thought about all the times I'd let things go, let people walk over me, because it was easier than fighting. But not this time. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who'd been told to sit down and be quiet. Every person who'd been told they didn't belong. I squared my shoulders and whispered into the darkness, I belong here. And I'm going to prove it. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the deed in front of me, the paper smooth and cool under my fingers. I was ready for the fight ahead. Vanessa might have thought she'd won, but she'd underestimated me. She didn't know that behind every quiet woman, there's a warrior waiting for the right moment to strike. And my moment had come. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the house settle around me like a shield. My heart was steady, my mind clear. This was my home, and I wasn't going anywhere. The morning light cut through the kitchen window, like a blade flooding the room with a sharp clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich scent grounding me, steadying me for what I knew was coming. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day I would face Vanessa head on. I could hear her moving around upstairs, her footsteps echoing like a threat. She had no idea I was ready for her. No idea that I'd spent the night preparing, combing through every document, every memory, every scrap of evidence I had. Today wasn't going to be about polite conversations and forced smiles. Today was about reclaiming what was mine. I took a deep breath and walked to the living room where Vanessa was already perched on the couch, like she owned the place. She was dressed in her usual polished-style hair, perfectly curled lipstick, a defiant red, but there was a tightness around her mouth, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew something was different. "Morning," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Did you sleep well?" I ignored the question and held up the manila envelope I'd spent the night filling. "We're going to settle this today, Vanessa," I said evenly. "No more games?" She raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, and what exactly do you think you're going to prove?" I stepped forward, my pulse pounding. "I'm going to prove that you're not going to take this house from me, and I have the paperwork to back it up." She laughed, but it was forced brittle. "You're really going to drag this out in front of everyone? Make a fool of yourself." I didn't flinch. "I'm not the one who's going to be embarrassed," I said. Because I have the original deed. I have every mortgage statement, every receipt, every scrap of proof that this house is mine. And I'm done letting you pretend otherwise. For a moment, the room fell silent. Vanessa's eyes flickered to the envelope in my hand, then back to my face. I could see the cracks forming in her armor, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "You're delusional," she said, her voice tightening. "This house was my uncle's, and now it's mine. You're just some leftover piece of his past." I felt the words like a slap, but I didn't let them shake me. "I was his wife," I said, my voice low and firm. "And he wanted me to have this house. You can say whatever you want, but it doesn't change the truth." Vanessa's lips parted, but before she could speak, there was a knock at the door. I turned, my heart racing. Tom stepped in, his calm presence, a steadying force. He nodded at me, then turned to Vanessa. "I've reviewed the documents," he said, his voice clear and authoritative. "The deed is valid. This house belongs to her, and there's no legal way for you to claim otherwise." Vanessa's face went white. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tom didn't stop. "I'd suggest you stop this now," he said, "because if you keep pushing, there will be consequences, legal and otherwise." I watched as Vanessa's composure cracked, her hands shaking at her sides. She looked around the room, as if searching for someone to back her up, but there was no one left to stand with her. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was the truth laid bare for everyone to see. I felt a surge of relief, but I didn't let it show. "I wasn't done yet. You've spent months trying to push me out of my own home," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "You've lied, manipulated, and tried to make me doubt myself. But I won't be bullied anymore." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You think you're so righteous," she hissed. "But you're just a bitter old woman clinging to something that's slipping through your fingers." I took a step closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "I'm not clinging to anything," I said. "I'm standing my ground. And if you think you can scare me into leaving, you're dead wrong." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Vanessa's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her like water down a drain. She turned away, her face a mask of fury and defeat. "This isn't over," she muttered. I shook my head. "Oh, it is. Because I'm done letting you tell me what I deserve." Tom placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I'll make sure the paperwork is filed and protected," he said. "She can't touch it now." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Vanessa stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, the silence ringing in my ears. My hands were still trembling, but I didn't care. I'd faced her, and I hadn't backed down. I'd proven that I was stronger than she thought. I looked around the living room, the sunlight slanting across the floor, turning the wood to gold. This was my home. Every nail, every scratch, every memory, it was all mine. And no one was going to take it from me. I sat down on the couch, letting the adrenaline slowly seep out of my body. My mind was already racing with what came next, changing the locks, updating the paperwork, making sure Vanessa couldn't come back. But for now, I let myself just sit there, feeling the quiet victory settle around me. This wasn't the end, I knew that. Vanessa would fight back, find new ways to try and worm her way into my life. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd shown her and myself that I had a voice, that I could stand up and say, "This is mine." And I wasn't done fighting. As I sat there, the weight of everything I'd been through washed over me. The loneliness, the doubt, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was strong enough to keep going. But in this moment, I knew I was. I'd faced down the person who'd tried to take everything from me, and I hadn't flinched. This house wasn't just a building. It was the sum of every moment I'd lived in it, every memory I'd made. And I was going to protect it, no matter what it took. I leaned back against the couch, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Vanessa was wrong. This house wasn't slipping through my fingers. I was holding on tighter than ever, and I wasn't going to let go. The day after the confrontation, the house was strangely quiet. Vanessa's departure had left a heavy hush, like the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. I moved through the rooms with measured steps, each breath feeling sharper, clearer. This was my home, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like it again. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the familiar ritual soothing. The aroma filled the kitchen, blending with the faint scent of roses from the garden outside. I took a slow sip, my hands finally steady. But even as I let myself relax, I knew this wasn't truly over. Vanessa might be gone, but her words still echoed in the corners of my mind. I'd seen the look in her eyes before she left. This wasn't surrender. It was retreat, and I had no illusions she'd stay gone for long. As if summoned by my thoughts, the phone rang. I answered on the second ring, my voice calm. "Hello," it was Tom. His voice was steady, reassuring. "I've filed everything at the courthouse," he said. "Your name is safe. She can't touch it." Relief washed over me, but I kept my tone measured. "Thank you, Tom. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You did the hard part," he said gently. "You stood up for yourself." I thanked him again and hung up. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the quiet. My mind was already racing with what came next, changing the locks, updating the utilities, making sure Vanessa couldn't worm her way back in. But for now, I let the victory settle over me like a warm blanket. I spent the morning cleaning not out of necessity, but out of defiance. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed polished the old silverware Martin and I had bought at a yard sale decades ago. Each swipe of the cloth felt like reclaiming a piece of my life, wiping away Vanessa's fingerprints, both literal and emotional. Around noon, I heard a knock at the door. My heart jumped, but when I opened it, it was Mrs. Jenkins holding a basket of fresh bread. Her face softened when she saw me. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice low but steady. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I managed a small smile. "I am," I said. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. "Vanessa, she doesn't belong here. We all know it. You've built this house piece by piece. It's yours. Don't let her make you forget that." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. "I won't," I whispered. She squeezed my hand before leaving, and I watched her walk down the path lined with the roses I'd tended for so many years. They were blooming bright and defiant, like a promise that things could grow even in the harshest soil. Later that day, I found myself in the attic. It had always been Martin's favorite place, his little sanctuary filled with old trunks and faded photographs. I hadn't been up there in years, but today it felt like the right time. I climbed the narrow stairs, slowly, each creak beneath my feet, a reminder of the years we'd spent here together. Dust motes danced in the light, streaming through the small window, turning the space into a quiet cathedral of memories. I opened one of the trunks and pulled out a photo album. Flipping through the pages, I found pictures of our children's birthdays, backyard barbecues, Christmas mornings spent in pajamas and laughter. Each image was a testament to the life we'd built here, the home we'd created out of love and stubbornness and dreams. I ran my fingers over one photograph of Martin and me, standing on the porch the day we moved in. We looked so young, so sure of ourselves. I could almost hear his voice in my ear. "Don't let them take what's yours." I closed the album and set it aside, feeling a calm determination settle into my bones. Vanessa might try to come back. She might try to twist the truth to bully me into giving up. But I was done being the quiet one. I was done letting her decide what I deserved. That evening, I called my daughter Emily. She lived a few states away, busy with her own family, but she picked up on the first ring. "Mom," she said, her voice worried. "Is everything okay?" I told her everything, every word, every fight, every piece of proof I'd gathered. She listened without interrupting, her silence a balm. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You've always been the strongest woman I know." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they felt cleansing, not weak. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. I needed to hear that. "You're not alone, Mom," she said firmly. "And you never will be." After we hung up, I sat on the couch, the quiet of the house settling around me. I could almost hear Martin's laughter in the walls, the echo of Emily's footsteps, from when she was little. This house was filled with love, with memories that no one, not even Vanessa, could take away. I knew there would still be battles ahead. Vanessa would come back, I was sure of it. But I was ready now. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. As the sun set outside, painting the walls in warm gold, I whispered into the stillness, "This is my home, and I'm going to keep it." I rose and walked to the front door, opening it wide to the cool evening air. The roses nodded in the breeze, a silent chorus of resilience. I stepped outside, letting the wind carry away the last of my fear. Vanessa thought she could break me, but she didn't know what I was made of. She didn't know that every crack she tried to make in me had only made me stronger. I stood on the porch, breathing in the scent of the roses, the scent of hope. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, I let myself feel the quiet triumph of standing my ground. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the showdown, the house was bathed in soft golden light, the kind that feels like a quiet blessing. I stood in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, breathing in the scent of fresh hope. It felt different now, calmer, stronger, as if the walls themselves were sighing in relief. This house had seen so many storms, and it had weathered them all. And so had I. I spent the early hours of that day moving through the rooms, opening windows to let in the crisp air. Each breeze carried the scent of roses and rain, the kind of clean freshness that signals a new beginning. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. For too long, I'd felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around Vanessa's moods and manipulations. Now I was taking it back, one breath, one decision at a time. I walked into the living room and paused in front of the old fireplace where I'd placed the photograph of Martin and me on our first night here. We were young and hopeful, surrounded by unpacked boxes and half-empty glasses of wine, laughing like the world couldn't touch us. I let my fingers brush against the frame, feeling the echo of that night in the air around me. "I'm still here," I whispered to the picture, a quiet vow to the man who'd believed in me, long before I ever believed in myself. I turned my attention to the hallway, where Vanessa's boxes still sat packed and ready for the day she'd finally come back for them. I could have left them there, a reminder of the ugliness she'd tried to sow. But I didn't want that energy in my home anymore. So I carried each box to the porch, stacking them neatly for when she or someone she sent came to collect them. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace. As I worked, neighbors began to stop by, drawn by the sight of me cleaning out the last remnants of Vanessa's claim. Mrs. Jenkins came first, her eyes warm with understanding. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft with pride. I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. "I am," I said. "It's time." She reached out, squeezing my shoulder gently. "We're all here for you. Don't forget that." I nodded, feeling the strength of her words settle deep in my bones. The sense of community I'd felt here had always been one of the reasons I'd loved this house, now more than ever. I understood how precious that was. Later in the afternoon, I found myself in the garden, trimming the roses that had stubbornly bloomed despite everything. My hands moved easily, the thorns pricking my fingers, but I welcomed the sting. It felt real, a reminder that even beauty had its defenses. As I worked, I thought about what it meant to truly start over. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about taking it, owning it, and using it as a foundation. This house wasn't just mine because of a name on a deed. It was mine because of the memories I'd built here, the love and laughter that filled every corner. I thought about Martin's voice in my head, always gentle, always encouraging. I thought about Emily's words of support and the kindness of neighbors who'd seen me through the worst. And most of all, I thought about the quiet strength I'd found inside myself, the voice that had grown louder with every battle I'd faced. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, I sat on the porch steps and let myself breathe in the quiet. It wasn't the end of the story, I knew that. Vanessa would try again, or there would be some other challenge, some other test. But I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I'd faced down the worst, and I'd found something unbreakable in the process, my own sense of belonging. I stood and walked back into the house, each step sure and steady. I moved through the rooms with a new sense of purpose, making plans for the things I wanted to fix and improve. I wanted to repaint the kitchen, to finally put up the shelves Martin and I had talked about for years. I wanted to turn the attic into a cozy reading nook, a place where I could sit and let the memories wash over me like warm summer rain. And I wanted to open this house again, to laughter, to family, to friends. I'd spent too long letting fear dictate my choices, letting the shadows of doubt cloud what was right in front of me. Now I was ready to fill these walls with life again. That night, as I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and the soft flicker of candlelight, I let the peace wash over me. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet and deep, like the roots of the old oak tree that stood in the backyard. The kind of peace that only comes when you know without a doubt that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake worrying about what would happen next, and realized those nights were behind me. I was done waiting for permission to live my life. This was my home, my story, my beginning. I let out a slow breath, a smile curving my lips. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, I let myself rest. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me like a familiar sigh, and closed my eyes. This is my home, I whispered to the darkness, my voice soft but sure. And I'm not done living in it. The words felt like a promise, one I'd carry with me through whatever came next. Because in the end, it wasn't about a house. It wasn't even about Vanessa. It was about the quiet strength that had always been mine, waiting for the moment when I was ready to claim it. And tonight, I finally was.